let's begin. First of all, I would like to thank our three distinguished panelists for being here. This is our first session of the conference and this joint initiative with Foundation De Gasperi, whom we thank again. I would like to give the floor first to Gonçalo, Castel-Branco, which is here to tell us what it's like to be in a re-election campaign of Obama in 2012 and what it's like to participate in the campaign for Hillary Clinton.
Well, thank you for inviting me, first of all. Well, it's very interesting to be on. I mean, a lot of people would argue that I participated in a very, very small part, but that I was involved with two sides of the same coin, which is populism. Mm-hmm. That is a critique that a lot of people have voiced, that Obama was in itself also a celebration of the populism and the oversimplification that paved the way for Trump. That a lot of Trump was, of course, a reaction to what Obama did or couldn't do, which is a detailed subject and an interesting subject in and of itself. But I ended up participating in both of them. I ended up being on the winning side of one and the losing side of the other. And it's pretty clear to me what the patterns are that are the same and those that are different. Speaking of the Obama campaign, I think that the technological issue, the biggest difference I would say about, and the biggest issue that I like to eliminate when I talk about American politics is the extreme professionalism of it. And I would say that first of all, you feel it in the granulated sense of reality. So the conversation we were having just a minute ago, and a lot of people have in Portugal about what the American people want or what Portuguese people want, that very rarely occurs in a campaign setting, ever. Campaigns view the electorate as a very layered thing and have a view, a particular view and a tactical view of each of them. And very seldom do you talk about or think about, in the electoral sense, what the American people feel or want. We know that 320 million people, 200 million voters. We know that a little over 130 million will maybe turn out to vote in a good year, which turns out this was a good year, which is something that a lot of people didn't think was the case. And we know of those people what are the slices that will go to one side, go to the other, and the ones that can swing or stay home. And the conversations are most often than not, and again, maybe my opinion of this is because I am not in the top tier of the campaign, I'm in the low tier of the campaign, and so our view is inherently tactical. But the experiences I've had interacting with people in the top tier is also the case. And so the conversation is campaigns spend very little time before or after trying to get big conclusions about what the campaign was about, what the electorate felt. So the theme of populism in its wider scope is hardly ever addressed, and therefore I'm probably the least qualified person to talk about it. What I can tell you is how populism is felt on the ground level and how it is controlled. The biggest question I think that we struggled with, we took advantage of it, I think, in 2012 and in 2008. I didn't participate in it, but I saw it, and we suffered from it in 2016, was a very large shift in the way that people gather and absorb information, the so-called post-truth politics. And the post-truth politics, a lot of people think of it as a very big issue that pertains to the moment we're in. I think it's much more a logistical issue about the context in which things propagate. We moved from a speculative generation, which was my parents' generation, in which we had very little information that was propelled through very, very large forces, and there were just 3 or 4 network TVs, 10 newspapers, and so as soon as something popped up, it was a fact, and we moved into what I call a curator generation, in which information reaches us through a curated network that we design ourselves and is aimed, conscientiously or not, to validate what we already think and not to challenge what we think. And so people will not get information that challenges them, and even if they do, they will dismiss it offhand, probably most often than not. And so I would say that the problem wasn't, I mean, we can talk all day about the candidate's flaws, about Hillary's perceived problems, but I would say that the campaign's biggest hurdle was how do we navigate an age and a structure, a social and informational structure in which nothing is true anymore. There's whatever we believe in, and whatever information verifies that, or whatever information doesn't verify that, and we dismiss it because it's from someone who's not in our political color or any other issue. So the problem with populism in a campaign setting and in a ground and the turnout setting is not so much what we're talking about, but how do we get it to the right people without it being contaminated through the source. And we felt a lot of it throughout the campaign. We felt a lot of it in the final stretch. We had a very, very clear example of it in a final week of the campaign with the FBI letter. I am a big proponent of the explanation. Of course, it's a comfortable one because I was on the losing side, but the explanation of what happened in the final 8 days with the FBI ended up completely flipping the election. I will argue for it because I have data that supports it. Of course, other people might have a different opinion of it. But again, it doesn't explain what happened in the whole electorate or the whole campaign. It does explain how something has an effect on the slice of people that end up flipping an election as tight as this one. I tell a lot of people that we should remind ourselves that the campaign was lost on 109,000 people. That amount of people can fit into a college football stadium in Michigan. So again, you will have a bigger input as to globally the threat of populism and how it played out in this election. I'm only qualified to talk about how it played out in very specific layers of this electorate and in what moments and what the data supports and doesn't support. The data right now does not seem to support the concept of, for example, shy voters, which is something that was popular for a while. The data does not seem to support it. The data does not seem to support the hacking theory that seems to be going around the last couple of days.
Yeah.
The data does not seem to support it. What the data says is there were 13% of undecided voters in 12 days out. Normally it's about 3-4% in modern times. And those 30%, 80+% were white people with a college degree, both men and women. That was the people we were courting for 3-4 months with the whole concept of decency and the temperament. So those themes and the concept of a plan, those themes were supposed to resonate with those people, and mainly trying to get them to stay home and not vote for Trump, not so much get them to vote for Hillary. And the tactical objective of the campaign in the swing states was to make sure that we get enough of those people to offset the lack of enthusiasm in African American population. That was basically it. And we knew it was going to be tight, but the numbers said we're going to squeak by. And the FBI letter, the first one a little bit, but especially the second one, flipped those numbers and energized a lot of people that up until that moment would have stayed home. And 3 days out, there was a very clear notion in the campaign that we could lose or is going to be a coin flip. And so it was not the big surprise that I think people seem to think it was. And what happens next, we don't know. And this room would have a lot of. It would be interesting to talk about what happens next in a Donald Trump presidency. I think you will have a very specific point of view because you laid out what could happen if we went the other way. And it's nice that I now have that book to torture me every day. But Pertaining to the campaign itself, I think we are pretty clear-eyed, if sad, of course, but clear-eyed as to how it happened. And I'm sure a lot of people will have different views or questions about, with different interpretations about why we lost. And that's a conversation that I'm very willing and eager to have and to discuss and to hear other opinions on.
Okay. Where was your, where did you campaign?
I was canvas captain in a Vegas field office in North Carolina, which was in Charlotte.
Charlotte. Yeah. Thank you, Gonçalo. We now change to Madalena. Madalena is a professor at Nova University, and the floor is yours.
Thanks. It's actually, I'm not going to talk about the American elections because I have nothing to say new. So much has been said, and actually, it's not my specialty. I have been studying mostly right-wing and extreme right parties in Europe, mainly in Eastern Europe, but also a little bit in Western Europe, or following also Western Europe, and getting more and more alarmed about the numbers and the prospects. So I'm going to try to do a little bit an analysis of what I think is most key in this evolution of the extreme right in Europe. I have to say that having started to study Eastern Europe in the 90s, somehow I have a certain déjà vu feeling. Because when I arrived in Poland in '97, I arrived at the weekend of the '97 elections, and I was completely kind of surprised at what kind of things people were, political parties were putting forward as their themes and as their slogans, and they were the kind of slogans that you see nowadays in Western Europe and in most of these. Mainly, increasingly in center-right parties, but also, of course, the rising extreme right. And these are essentially very reactionary type of slogans on our society and on modernity, basically. And I have a bit this déjà vu feeling from the 90s in Poland and then Hungary and these elections that I followed. So for me, the central. I'm not going to talk so much about populism. Populism is for academics a very hard concept to grasp somehow, and it can be seen also as a good thing, as you said. Obama embodies, in a certain sense. Some might think this is bad, but for me, it's true that he really reached somehow to the people without needing the intermediation of representative institutions. Somehow there is this idea of populism, of having these politicians that are able to kind of embody what they feel and they claim to be the will of the people. And I think that's of course the dimension of what happened with Trump. He was able to do that, and unlike Hillary, who was very bad at doing that. But at the core of this extreme right and ascension somehow, I think is nationalism, is the idea of a homogeneous nation state, of a some kind of a simplification of society, of going back to somehow a golden age in which things were better, and I think this very much fits somehow the zeitgeist, a bit of spirit of the time nowadays. I somehow have the feeling sometimes when I'm listening to extreme right politicians in Europe that they're appealing to these people that somehow feel like they are in this film Back in the Future, this film where Michael J. Fox goes to the future and then he wants to come back because he didn't like, it was not where he belonged. He belonged somehow 30 years before. And I think this is a little bit the feeling that that is captured in this speech, meaning we are in times of strong social change, in strong economic change. There was a lot of talk about this, the losers of globalization, how they somehow feel their status, their values, their ideas of how, of their worthiness as well, somehow challenged by very fast social change, and this somehow also makes this glimpse back to the 20s and the 30s, when somehow the same feeling was part of the consequences of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and somehow created the same reaction. And that's why I think it's kind of hard for us younger people who have benefited from all these changes to kind of understand this frame. For us, all these things are good somehow. We can travel, we can get good jobs, we can have friends from many places, and all this is good. But I can understand that for another generation and for maybe the people who don't have the same opportunities, this is all wrong. This is something which is not part of what is positive in society. So I think for this reason, the nationalist or the nationalism as a frame is a very capturing point, and is a very attractive speech. And from from the literature on nationalism, I think it's good to try to understand what it is. I mean, because nationalism is not simply this idea that we have that we are part of a nation and that we kind of belong to, we are Portuguese, that's something normal, this is the way we do things, it's something calm and it's something, relaxed. No, nationalism actually it's a strategy, it's an ideology and a strategy to win power, right? And it is basically a political strategy and a political speech to win state power. Second, it does that through mobilization, and it does that by somehow attempting to in this context attack heterogeneity, so ethnic heterogeneity, immigrants. Some friends from the US said that when Trump was speaking, he could speak for 2 hours, nobody cared what he was saying. As soon as immigration came up, people there would listen. So this was really the catch, and he kind of noticed that. So in the US, immigration is very important, but in Europe, I think it's also, of course, very important, especially in the countries where this immigration has this specific characteristics of being linked with religious diversity, like with Islam. In particular, this is very strong. It's something people can point their frustrations and their kind of misgivings about modern society. And third, I think this also links with this idea, especially in Europe, that somehow we are very liberal, we are creating very liberal societies, and we are giving space to very strong religious and social ideologies like the ones contained in Islam that actually threaten our way of life. And last week there was a very interesting debate in Germany. There was a talk show, the most popular talk show host, Anne Will. She's lesbian. She's declared homosexual, and she invited for her show. She invited a fully, how do you say that when they're a woman in Islam? Burqa? With a burqa, yeah. No, burqa. Hijab. Yeah. Hijab. Only the eyes, right?
Yes.
Right. Hijab. Yeah. And this woman was sympathizer of jihadists. I mean, not totally openly, but she was clearly radicalized. and supporting radicals. And what is brought up in public debate was why is she giving the space and the airtime to people who are threatening our society and our way of living and actually our security. And I think this kind of captured very well, this very liberal woman who was, very out there on morals and on somehow pluralism, and giving space to her opposite somehow. And so somehow I really think that this captures this malaise that is going on in European societies, especially in Northern Europe, in which you have very strong groups of extremely liberal people that are for liberal and for religious pluralism and for giving the floor to every kind of speech, and increasingly big number of people that think this is undue and that we are actually weakening ourselves by doing that. And to these people, I think the speech of all the extreme right, from Alternative for Germany to Front National, this is a very inviting alternative to the center right parties that have somehow been representing. So this is more or less my analysis of what is going on in Europe. Now the question is what is an appropriate response? And of course the appropriate response is very different from country to country, right? I mean, problems are different from country to country. But maybe focusing on what happened this week in France and thinking that these are the most dangerous and somehow coming elections, and the primaries have been chosen again, according to the media, the wrong candidate in terms of what the polls tell us. I actually think that it is important to understand and maybe to forecast why was this man François Fillon actually an attractive and maybe a successful antidote to Marine Le Pen. I mean, François Fillon was Prime Minister of Sarkozy. He's a Catholic, right? I mean, he's a social conservative, but but he did not buy into the extremist speech of Marine Le Pen like Sarkozy did. So he kind of kept confined to his to a certain conservatism, which does not give way to reactionary politics. I mean, he was somehow Eurosceptic. He was always kind of, not totally Eurosceptic, but somehow always reserved about Europe, and an economic liberal, definitely, very much all the way. This is maybe a little bit dangerous in terms of electorate, but I somehow, feel that he somehow embodies the conservative European classic that is maybe a good antidote to, but I don't want to make any forecast because that has been a very risky affair. Yes, exactly. So these are my thoughts on this topic. Just maybe a last one. I think as much of course, that we are worried about the outcome of the Italian referendum and of the elections in France. I think as strong a risk as that is, also an important risk is, as I mentioned, the somehow contamination of the center right by the rhetoric of the extreme right. And I think this should be really point that of reflection in our societies, because this is really a point where we are attacking our liberal democracy, and we are doing it voluntarily, right? I mean, we are weakening our moral and our beliefs and our systems to try to avoid something else which we find wrong, but actually by imitating it. So I would say this is as much a concern to me and as much a concern for European democracy, and a process that we have been seeing happening in Europe in the last 20 years. Basically, the center-right being contaminated, and what is accepted to be said in public about immigrants, about refugees, and how to treat refugees, and this has gone so much to the right and to an unacceptable level that I feel this is also, independently of the result of the elections, already a big loss.
Okay, thank you. So we now have Luigi Crema, who is a professor at the University of Milan. And thank you very much for coming from Italy today.
Thank you.
And the floor is yours, Luigi.
Thank you for accepting my need to talk in English, and actually I pushed everybody towards this language. And I thank you for accepting this compromise. We are all sons and daughters of the Roman Empire. But at the moment, we need English, not Latin, to have a common ground. So my name is Luigi Crema, as Raquel said, and I am a public international lawyer. I am not a politician, an expert of politics. I don't teach politics. And actually, when you were talking, I had a lot of empathy and sympathy for some of your arguments, and I just wanted to jump on the opposite side to have the floor at the end with some questions. I hope being here, I would have the pleasure to ask them anyway. But I'm not going to talk about populism in explicit terms. I lived the last 6-8 months in Indiana, one of the swing states that actually pushed the Trump nomination, and I saw the rising force of Trump in the eyes, and not with phone calls and other data analysis, but just talking to people. Only university professors were defending Hillary Clinton, and in shops and on the streets, just meeting people, nobody was happy of what was going on. On the other hand, I just came back a couple months ago in Milan, where I live and teach right now, and on the square I just meet real supporters. When there are center, left, or left and right kiosks, there are 3 people around those kiosks. When there is a Grillo kiosk, you have 25 people around it. Okay, so I have these vibes. I can talk for hours about what's happening now in Italy and what I saw in America, where I lived for the last 5 years, basically. But that's for coffee break and dinner. It's not going to be my focus. If you have questions about what I experienced, I bet on Trump. You know, when I was there, I put my name on it because I was sure he was going to win. Because there was too many things that were just hitting me, surprisingly, in that direction. And I was talking to a friend that came here, Giovanni Madalena, let's say last month, and he was basically on the same page. No? But anyway, that's really a small talk and not science or good arguments. So what I'm going to do, on the contrary, is not talking about populism, hard definition. I would love to spend some words on what is populism. I agree. The first comment I got when Obama was in 2008 around was, he's so immediate. Better than other people, he understood the role of social networks and media. Those are definitions, those are phrases that can fit in many ways to populism. But what is good is to be immediate. What is not good is to be populist. What's the difference? We have to be precise. Maybe he didn't talk against something. So I think that one of the labels that we can add to immediacy is to talk against. And today in Europe and America, who is going to win? Who talks against something? Salvini in Italy and Grillo are talking about something. The same Renzi won talking against the old politicians. So even a moderate coming from the left won talking against something. And Trump is the perfect example of the moment in which we are. We have to start talking against something to win. As you said, nationalism can be just a good argument to win. I'm going to talk against something. So I'm going to talk, I'm going to make the analysis of what I think is one of the main arguments behind Trump, behind the feelings of people, behind many people that are voting or supporting Grillo. We are facing right now a strong movement of outcasts, of people reacting against globalization. Not just, as Americans say, white trash. I have a friend that is from Korea, a woman that voted Trump. Is it possible? She's a woman. But the data are clear. No, that there was really a problematic portfolio of voters behind Trump. So my short presentation will be against the technocratic paradigm that prepared the ground for our current movements of pure protest and very little propositive ideas. The technocratic paradigm is based on a few assumptions. I will give you a handful. Democracy, 1919 Weimar Constitution, produced Nazism. So we better have strong constitutional systems in place to control parliaments and governments. In order to avoid the outrageous mistakes of the 20th century, we should rely on supranational stable organizations, or courts, or powers. Together with the other assumption, against Weimar, we are basically saying that it's better the tyranny of courts or international organizations than the tyranny, the risky tyranny of democracy, of majority. Sovereignty, state sovereignty means impunity. We need accountability. Nationalism or national identity pushed towards too much violence in the past. We need a new identity beyond the nations in order to have peace. This is just common assumptions at the beginning of a constitutional law class or other classes. Nations are folded in on themselves and generate unjustified racial nationalistic pride. Following the successful and welcoming experience of the USA, we need a common political identity which transcends differences to have mobility across European states, if we are in the EU, and make our societies open to migrants. That's another clear assumption if you study immigration law. It's somewhere in the introduction of your manual. Politics is part of a utopia. And in the 70s, and then with the end of the Cold War, we passed politics and utopia. Free market and pragmatic approaches allow the free meeting of free people in order to get a better society. Politics is not to be trusted. It's the art of compromise. Compromise is not science. Economics is a science. Compromising means that you are giving something in order to protect something else. That can be found in books on economics. Talking to a friend that is teaching now in the UK, it seems that the free market by itself can lead to the best outcome and include, for this reason. But not only is it better to remove certain competence from politics into the supranational realm, but also from below, we don't trust any more politicians and parliaments, we need authorities for communications, the authority for energy, we need experts. So managers and not politicians are the standards for the good development of the common good. What actually brings unity in a society is not politics, is not identity, is the market. Open trade of goods and finance regulate the fair allocation of resources. So everybody can jump in with a good idea, and the market will say that's a good idea. Okay, that's a stupid list. No? It's just common phrases you can find. It's a narrative. People call them part of a narrative. And I agree with some of them. I found that too many of them are today naive, if not explained. We can accept these assumptions as assumptions in 1961. We cannot accept them as assumptions anymore. And what I found often difficult in listening to politicians from the left and from the right is to address these assumptions and explain them in a different way. When we hear people talking from the left about welfare, there is always the argument of public debt and the difficulty. That was true also in America after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. It was impossible to talk about the Obamacare reform without avoiding the problem of federal taxes and expenses. It's stupid for an Italian to explain to Portuguese people about this argument, okay? Because it's basically the last 8 years of our political life is about this. But also on the right side, every free marketist siren saying that you need to reform the job market and other stuff, just bring to our memory the inequalities and the troubles and the instability that recent reforms brought. So again, there is right away a label that can be on Facebook or on big names, in the columns of the most important newspapers, coming in and saying, well, there is a risk on the opposite side and blah, blah, blah. What I see is that at the end, a big problem, a real problem, not just the plus 0.5% of GDP or whatever, comes in, like the huge migration from North Africa and Syria. Another huge problem comes in, and there's not a way to address it. We lack of the freedom to address these issues. So I think that populism comes here. In the difficulty that traditional politicians, meaning the expression of the political forces in place for several decades now, basically don't try new ways to address problems. But they always go into a narrative that is already labeled in some way. In a certain way, we expect in a technocratic paradigm that in this lack of freedom, where clear rules and a free market bring development, when there is some piece of sand going into the gears and stopping the gears from flipping, we don't know how to fix the car. Because we tell to ourselves, everything was in the right place. Everything should work. So why is the car not going on? Well, you should also know how to open the car and clean the engine. So I think that at the moment, what is happening is this inability to describe outside the box the huge problems that are affecting Europe and also America. The last Trump went in explicit terms against NATO, against NAFTA, against the TTIP, and he won the elections. Grillo is against Euro, against the EU, and so then it's very easy to take the whole thing without unpacking those assumptions, to take the whole international effort of cooperation and just reject it. Of course, without a solid ground, just as a protest. But because there was not an attempt to reform it coming from politics. And when I say politics, I say parties. So today, I can say without any problem, being an international lawyer, that's the dish where I use my brand. But we are seeing the failure of the technocratic paradigm in which all the big decisions are moved to to other places and not the parliament. We're seeing this, well, that's the beginning, we're just seeing the top of the iceberg. But if we keep on not addressing how to change and reform the international cooperation, we will see the whole iceberg coming out. And I see Trump, Grillo, and Brexit, and nobody said yet this famous word, but as just, we can call them populism or confuse the need of a reform. And when things don't come, the confuse the need of a reform and takes the wrong way. That is just trusting who screams the more. So I'm going to finish here because I think the debate is going to be much more interesting than refining my points. Of course, I wrote something, and of course I didn't read it. Let's say, a good discussion you never have to read, but I think that my point is not clear, and I will accept that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.